I swear it started with the loudest, most sickening crunch I'd ever heard. I looked out my front window, and my heart seized in my chest, a cold fist of dread closing around it. My son's wheelchair, his custom $8,000 electric wheelchair, was lying in pieces on the driveway, a mangled, crushed wreck. And standing over it like some kind of smug, triumphant supervillain was Karen. Yep. That Karen, the HOA president, the very same one who had relentlessly harassed us since the day we moved in because we didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. Whatever the hell that meant. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching and what time it is there right now. But this wasn't just some nasty letter on our doorstep. This was outright destruction. This was a felony. And the worst part? My 8-year-old son, Jacob, was sitting on the porch steps, silent, staring at the wreckage with huge, tear-filled eyes. I sprinted outside so fast I nearly fell. "What did you do?" Karen didn't flinch. She crossed her arms and tilted her head with that fake little smile she always wore when she was being evil. "Oh, that thing?" she said, pointing at the crumpled metal and wires. "It was blocking the sidewalk. I asked you 3 times to keep your clutter off HOA property." Clutter? I could feel a murderous heat rising up my neck. My son's only means of mobility, his independence, his lifeline, she called it clutter. "You ran it over," I said, struggling to keep my voice from shaking. "You literally drove your car up the driveway and crushed it." Karen actually rolled her eyes. "Well, maybe don't leave expensive toys lying around. That's not my fault." It took every ounce of my willpower not to scream. I looked over at Jacob again. His bottom lip was trembling. He didn't understand why someone would do this, and honestly, neither did I. But one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't letting this slide. I didn't care who Karen knew on the HOA board. I didn't care how many lawyers she bragged about keeping on retainer. She had messed with the wrong family. And she had no idea what kind of laws she just shattered, because this wasn't just vandalism. This was a direct, vicious violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I was about to throw the entire legal arsenal straight at her smug little face. But you can't understand what happened next without understanding what my family has been through. I'm not some special agent or a military man with a badge. My authority isn't something I earned in a uniform. It was forged over years of sleepless nights and endless paperwork. It began the day my son, Jacob, was born with a disability that made his life a struggle from day one. I became his advocate, his shield, his relentless protector. My war wasn't fought on a battlefield. It was fought in doctors' offices, with insurance companies, and against bureaucratic systems that are designed to wear you down. I learned how to read legal documents, how to cite specific clauses, and how to fight for my son's rights in a world that wasn't built for him. His wheelchair isn't just a device. It's a symbol of his freedom, his independence. Every piece of that machine was bought with purpose, with a single goal: to give my son the ability to move through the world on his own terms. The one Karen just crushed was his lifeline. It was a custom-made electric chair, fitted to his body, with specialized controls that allowed him to navigate his world. It was his legs, his freedom, his very sense of self. And as I stood there, watching him watch her destroy it, every single battle I had ever fought for him, every frustrating phone call, every denied claim, every ounce of rage I had ever had for a system that made his life harder, came rushing to the surface. I had always kept a binder, a physical archive of our life. It was my tactical file. In it were all the doctor's letters, every receipt for every piece of specialized equipment, and a copy of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I even had a copy of the neighborhood's own reasonable accommodations clause, which I'd insisted on getting when we first moved in, just in case. It's a clause I knew she was about to find out she had violated. What Karen saw was a mild-mannered father in a quiet suburb. What she didn't see was the warrior inside, the one who had fought battles she couldn't even comprehend. My neighbors, most of them, saw me as the quiet guy down the street. They knew about Jacob, of course. They saw him rolling up and down the sidewalk with his friends. They saw us playing in the front yard. They saw our struggle. They didn't speak up, not against Karen. They were too afraid. But their silence wasn't a sign of indifference. It was a sign of fear. Fear she had expertly cultivated for years. They thought her reign was absolute. They had no idea that the one person she chose to attack was the only one in the entire neighborhood who possessed the exact legal and emotional arsenal needed to bring down her entire corrupt system. They had no idea that the one person she chose to attack was the only one in the entire neighborhood who possessed the exact legal and emotional arsenal needed to bring down her entire corrupt system. You see, Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a parasite that had attached itself to the community, and no one knew how to cut her off. She hadn't been elected by anyone. From what I gathered from the other residents, she had simply stepped into the role of HOA president after the previous one moved away, and no one had challenged her. She used that vacuum of power to turn the community's bylaws into a weapon. Her arsenal consisted of a clipboard, a cheap walkie-talkie, and an insatiable appetite for control. She had a list of pet peeves as long as her arm, and a fine for every single one. I heard stories about her from the neighbors, whispered in hushed tones as if she were a ghost who might overhear them. She once fined a family for their daughter's chalk drawing on the sidewalk, citing a graffiti rule. Another neighbor, an older gentleman who had lived here for 40 years, was threatened with a lien on his house because his mailbox was a half-inch below the required height. He had fixed it, of course, but the memory of her screaming at him on his own property was seared into his mind. She would patrol the streets at dawn, her eyes narrowed, a strange smile plastered on her face, searching for a misplaced garbage can or a blade of grass that was too long. Her favorite method of intimidation was the certified letter. It was her version of a bullet, a cold, legal threat that she would mail to your house, promising to escalate the most minor infractions to fines, liens, and even legal action. Her arrogance was a force of nature. It was built on the foundation that she was untouchable. And in a way, she was. The HOA's board was made up of her friends, a group of spineless enablers who signed off on every single fine she levied without question. They didn't care about the community. They cared about keeping Karen happy so she wouldn't turn her fury on them. Karen had created a miniature police state, a pocket-sized dictatorship where her word was law. She was a petty tyrant, drunk on the microscopic power she had seized, and the community had learned to live in fear of her. No one had ever pushed back. Not a single person had ever told her no. They had simply paid the fines, mowed their lawns, and gritted their teeth. What Karen didn't realize was that I wasn't just another neighbor. I didn't care about her small-town clique, her rigged board, or her cheap threats. I wasn't interested in fighting her with her rules. I was about to bring an entirely different rulebook to her front door. A rulebook she would not be able to ignore. I was about to bring an entirely different rulebook to her front door, a rulebook she would not be able to ignore. The moment I got home, I didn't waste a second. I didn't shout. I didn't rant. I simply went into tactical mode. My son, Jacob, was inside the house, soothed and distracted by his mother and his sister. I stepped back outside and surveyed the scene. The crumpled remains of the chair, the distinct tire tracks leading up my driveway. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of malice. I meticulously took photos with my phone from every possible angle, capturing the twisted frame and the tire marks with the precision of a crime scene investigator. I then went inside and pulled out the binder, the one I had kept for years with every single document related to Jacob's health and his rights. When I first called the police, I wasn't sure what to expect. I figured they'd come out, take a report, and maybe we'd get some kind of property damage charge on her. But when the officer walked up, and I showed him the remains of the chair, his whole demeanor changed. His professionalism shifted into a focused intensity. "Was someone in the chair when this happened?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "No, thank God," I said. "But my son, he was right there." She didn't even slow down. The officer crouched down, meticulously taking photos with his phone. He measured the tire tracks that clearly showed Karen's Lexus had deliberately rolled right up onto our driveway. Then he turned to Jacob, who was now sitting in his backup manual chair, one that barely fit him anymore. "You okay, buddy?" he asked gently. Jacob nodded, but he wouldn't look up. The officer stood back up and faced me. "You said the HOA president did this. Kara Madison?" I said, "It's Karen. She's the one who's been harassing us since day one. Does your son have any kind of medical diagnosis we can document?" I showed him the ADA paperwork we kept in a binder inside the house just in case. It had everything: doctor's letters, equipment receipts, even a copy of the neighborhood's reasonable accommodations clause. The officer read it, nodded slowly, and then said the words that made my stomach drop and my fist clench all at once. "This isn't just vandalism. This is a federal ADA violation." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said, "this isn't just going to be handled by local law enforcement. You're going to want to contact an attorney, a damn good one." So I did. And let me tell you, I found a shark. Her name was Marissa Grant. And the moment I walked into her office and showed her the pictures of the destroyed wheelchair, she actually muttered, "Oh my God," under her breath. She didn't waste time. "You're going to sue the HOA, not just Karen personally, the entire association, because if she was acting as HOA president when she did this, they're liable." I blinked. "But she used her personal car." Marissa leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "Doesn't matter. She invoked HOA authority when she claimed she was enforcing sidewalk rules. That puts them on the hook for millions." She started rattling off acronyms and laws I'd never heard of. Title III, Section 504, Disability Access Protections, Compensatory Damages, Punitive Damages. I didn't understand every word, but I understood one thing clearly. Karen was in a world of hurt, and she didn't even know it yet. Karen was in a world of hurt, and she didn't even know it yet. True to her nature, she decided to double down. Just a week after the incident, a certified letter arrived at my door from the HOA. It was a formal violation notice. The language was cold, precise, and utterly insane. It cited unauthorized animal brought onto HOA property and imposed a $250 fine. She was actually trying to fine me for being federally protected. This wasn't just a threat. It was a slap in the face. She was so deluded by her own power that she believed she could issue a fine against a federal law. This was an act of war, and she had just handed me the ammunition to end her. The next day, she had the audacity to stop by my driveway as I returned from the grocery store with Jacob. She pulled her car in front of my own, got out, and swaggered over with that chilling smile. "Still dragging that dog around, huh?" she sneered. "You might want to check your mailbox. We're just getting started." Her words were a physical threat. Her tone was pure venom. She expected me to shrink, to cower, to beg, but I had a trump card she couldn't see. I smiled back, a calm, lethal smile that made her face lose just a little color. "Funny," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The Department of Justice said the exact same thing." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Her entire posture changed. The arrogance melted away, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. She didn't have the guts to ask what I meant. She just got back in her car and drove away. That moment was the first domino. That night, I got an email from the ADA investigator assigned to my case. They had just received my evidence and were not only pursuing it federally, but were working with the state's Civil Rights Enforcement Agency to issue a local citation as well. Karen had crossed the wrong person, and the best part was that she still had no idea just how bad it was about to get. The following day, things started unraveling for her. I woke up to a letter from the county, a formal notice of compliance review for the entire HOA, triggered by a suspected violation of federal civil rights law. That morning, while walking Jacob around the lake, I passed a group of neighbors whispering. A man named Pete, who I knew lived down the street, approached me and asked, "Did Karen really grab your son's chair last weekend?" I nodded. "And you reported it?" I nodded again. He looked over his shoulder, then leaned in. "I've been waiting for someone to finally take her down. She once threatened to fine me for parking in my own driveway because it didn't look organized. Turns out I wasn't the first, or the fifth, or even the 10th person she had bullied. Karen had a history, a long trail of victims. She just hadn't crossed the wrong person until now." The next day, flyers started appearing in mailboxes. They were simple, but they were a weapon. "Know Your Rights," the headline read. "ADA protections for residents with disabilities." They were sent anonymously, but I knew who had coordinated it. My ADA field rep had confirmed it. The flyer explained that HOA rules could never override federal law and detailed the specific fines Karen could be facing. It also informed people how to file their own complaints. Karen exploded. She showed up at my door, red-faced and fuming, clutching one of the flyers. This is libel defamation," she shrieked. "I'm the HOA president," I calmly said. "You were. Not anymore." Because while she was screaming at me, something else had already happened. A special meeting had been called by a majority of the HOA's voting members quietly behind her back, and they had voted to suspend her authority pending the results of the investigation. The next night, someone posted the video to the community's Facebook group. It was the raw footage of her grabbing Jacob's chair, his small yelp, her voice shrieking that service dogs aren't real. It went viral, shared outside the neighborhood, reposted on Reddit, and even picked up by a local news outlet that loved a good Karen caught on camera story. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the entire community realizing they'd been bullied for years by a dictator who finally got caught. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the entire community realizing they'd been bullied for years by a dictator who finally got caught. The following week, a certified letter arrived at Karen's house. I got a copy too. It was from the Department of Justice, and the language was surgical and final. It explained that based on the video evidence, witness reports, and her gross violation of Title III of the ADA, she was being formally charged with obstruction of disability access. Not just a fine, not just a warning, a formal charge. And that wasn't all. The letter also stated that the HOA, too, was being put under a 6-month federal compliance audit. All records, finances, and complaint files had to be turned over to the Department of Justice. The neighborhood's entire leadership structure had to be reviewed. The authority she had so desperately clung to was being meticulously dismantled, piece by piece, by a federal agency that operates on a timeline of justice, not a schedule of petty fines. Karen tried to fight it. Of course she did. She filed a pathetic appeal, a desperate final flail against a force she couldn't comprehend. She claimed she was being unfairly targeted by a man with a dog pretending to be disabled. That phrase, she actually wrote that in an official email. She put it in writing. And because I was a central witness, the ADA forwarded it to me as part of their evidence collection. It was a gold mine. I simply handed it off to my lawyer. Karen didn't realize her words were digging her own grave deeper, providing more and more irrefutable proof of her malicious intent. Her last, pathetic attempt to maintain control was now a permanent part of the federal record. A week later, I got a call. The county ADA enforcement office wanted me to attend a hearing as a key witness in the case. I accepted. I had been waiting for this. I had been planning for this. I was ready to watch her face when she realized that everything she had built on a foundation of fear and intimidation was about to come crashing down in a single, devastating moment. When I arrived at the hearing, Karen was already seated, her arms folded, her expression sour and belligerent. The board members, DOJ reps, and ADA enforcement officers were all there, their faces calm and businesslike. They weren't here for a debate. They were here for a verdict. The lead officer, a woman with an unflappable demeanor, began by playing the video I had recorded. The room went silent as Karen's shrill voice echoed through the speakers, her pathetic attempt to destroy my son's chair on full display. The officer then read the law, a list of specific federal statutes that Karen had violated. She read the violation, detailing Karen's direct obstruction and discriminatory actions. And then she read the fine. Karen was ordered to pay $50,000 in damages. Not just to me, but to the HOA as well, for the legal trouble her actions had brought upon the neighborhood. Her face crumpled. She stammered, "I was just trying to enforce order." The officer's voice was like ice. "You enforced personal bias, not law. That ends now." Karen was stripped of all HOA authority, permanently. She was banned from every decision-making role and given a formal warning that any future violation would be treated as criminal harassment under federal law. She had lost everything. Her power, her reputation, and her entire life's pathetic little project. I walked out of that hearing and looked at my son, Jacob. He wagged his tail like he knew exactly what had just happened. And in a way, he did. The story didn't end there. 2 months later, a letter arrived from the DOJ. It was a formal invitation extending an offer to join their regional ADA Public Compliance Board. They wanted me, a combat veteran and federal officer, to help educate other communities about what happened here. I accepted. Now I speak at HOA leadership summits. I train local law enforcement on ADA policies. And yes, I still live in that same neighborhood, happily and peacefully. Titan still walks proudly beside me, his vest a silent badge of triumph. As for Karen, she sold her house quietly and moved 3 towns over. Something tells me she's a lot more careful now about who she picks a fight with, especially if they have a dog and a badge. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-life justice, HOA takedowns, and epic underdog wins, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell because next time it might be Karen versus a Navy SEAL, or worse, Karen versus the internet.